mean, it as distraught. She wasn't doing well. Okay, it was just very distraught. There's instances where I think at one point she even had her one child, the casket dug up and brought into the White House because she missed her child so much. Reason I bring this up is the day before Lincoln is supposed to leave to get on the train to head to Gettysburg to do this dedication. They have a child get very sick, and at this point they don't really have a good track record at this point with their children getting sick and surviving. So their child gets really sick, and the thought that Abraham Lincoln would not stay at the White House, that he would leave to go give this speech, was something that his wife couldn't comprehend. And for all the men out there listening, you know what it's like to, let's say, want to leave the house when the female in your life wants you to stay home, right? So imagine multiplying that by a million with something that important. So Lincoln's even, he's carrying that as well. And he doesn't know that maybe when he returns home that he'll have lost another child. That's a very real possibility. And yet he realizes how important this dedication is and chooses to go and still give the speech. And without knowing that, I think that's just important to know in the context of this. So anyways, this is the environment. This is the situation Lincoln is in by this point, November 19th, 1863. And so the big question is, why are we still fighting? Why are we fighting this war? And is it worth it? Has it been worth it? And is it worth it any further? When is enough enough? When is enough death enough? Is it worth to keep going forward? And in the context of all of this, Lincoln wants to say something that answers yes, this is worth it, but not only to just state that, but kind of change the trajectory of the mindset at the time and kind of bring it back to amongst the masses that yes, this is worth it and let's continue. And that's what's so remarkable about the Gettysburg Address, that in 2 minutes and 272 words, he's trying to change the mindset of the North. And that's the tall task of the Gettysburg Address. And the fact that he, essentially accomplishes that in a beautiful way is why the speech is just, remembered to this day the way it is. So, Lincoln's speech is basically, you can look at it in 3 parts. He begins by talking about the past, the birth. He talks about the present, the death, and then the future, the rebirth. All right, so that's kind of his basic structure. That let's reflect upon the past, let's look at the situation today, and let's look into the future. So those are the 3 components of the speech. So with that, we move the mic, get a little bit closer to the computer here, and let's go ahead and get into the Gettysburg Address and break it down a little bit. Not a professor of history here, but I think we can handle our own a little bit here. So we're going to read through this just chunks at a time. Shouldn't take too long. Again, it's only a 2-minute speech, 272 words. 7 years ago. We all know scores 20 years, 7 years ago. So 87 years, which is remarkable. 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. So he's reflecting back from 1863 to back to 1776. It's only been 87 years. And it's remarkable to think that in 87 years you've gone from declaring independence to this moment in time with the Civil War. How much has changed? What's at stake? that this great experiment, will it not even live to see 100 years? But also keep in mind, with only 87 years passing, that the people of that day, their parents, would have fought, potentially fought in the Revolutionary War. That you're talking about just being one generation removed from people that fought in the Revolutionary War, which is, mind-boggling. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So this first line is the past. He's basically pointing back to the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. And I think that, as we move forward, you'll see that this is all about the great experiment that is what these United States are, that it is a union with the idea that all men are created equal, as they broke off from England. But that proposition itself not flawed the initial execution, because while they had the idea that all men are created equal, that they did not execute all men being treated equal, obviously with slavery. So as we move along, now to today, we are at the present now. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. So he's basically attaching the Civil War, saying the Civil War is essentially a test to that idea that a nation can be conceived in the idea that all men are created equal, and whether that idea is correct and deserves to live on. This is the great experiment. This is the only nation on the planet with that concept. And if it passes the test, then it is worthy of continuing. If it fails that test, then that other empires around the world, other kingdoms, other countries can look and say, that would be the end and say, look, it was tried, didn't even last 88 years, 87 years in, it fell apart. So, that would that concept ever be tried again? Now, we are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that nation might live. So he's basically saying we're here at a great battlefield of that war, of that test, and we're here today to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those that gave their lives to that nation so that it might live on. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. And even that one little line, it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. Just because, when things are politicized, everything gets politicized back then just as it does today. So the fact that a president of the United States would show up at a ceremony dedication and give a speech about a cemetery dedicated to fallen soldiers, and again, it's, in 1864, just one, at this point, it's basically less than a year away from Election Day. Okay? So, you would probably have a lot of people saying that this isn't appropriate, that the president's here speaking at this type of event, or you might even have people saying that dedicating a ceremony to this unjust war. If you have people that are against the war, well, dedicating a ceremony to in honor of this war, people would think that it's inappropriate. So he solidifies it in this speech that lives on to this day, and in his words, it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. So that's the present. Now we kind of, we're still in the present for one more line, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. So this is the last line of, keeping the speech within the present, but saying that whatever we do or say here pales in comparison to what the men who have fought and died here have already done. So he's still painting the picture that this war is a test on whether or not this idea of having a nation where all men are created equal is correct and deserves to live on. Of course, he's in the affirmative with that. That's kind of a given. But that the battle itself, the result of men dying, that is what they died for. So when people are saying, why are we fighting this war? Is it worth going on? He's answering that with this speech. And he's attaching the sacrifice of these men to that cause. And he's saying that is the ultimate cause. To fight for that idea and to give your life. That there is no greater thing that one can do for that cause. So regardless of what they do at that ceremony or at the cemetery and do at that dedication, and regardless of what is said, that it just pales in comparison to what these men have already done. And that's how he wraps up the present and then looks to the future. The world will little know nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work for which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. So he's looking to the future, and he's telling them what our job is. That our job isn't necessarily to dedicate this ground. Our job is to stay dedicated to the unfinished work of what they're fighting for, and saying that we need to rededicate ourselves to this cause. We need to dedicate ourselves to this idea that what our nation was founded on is correct, it is just, and it does deserve to continue seeing the light of day, but we have to dedicate ourselves to that. And if that means winning this war, then that's what we will do. And whatever we do, as hard as it may seem, okay, and regardless of the sacrifice, how hard and unfair the sacrifices we're making and being asked to continue to make may seem, that nothing we have to endure or sacrifice compares to what these men have already done. How can you argue with that? It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. So again, just kind of reiterating the previous line and what I just said, but again, just tying in that their sacrifice, it was the last full measure of devotion, that they were devoted to that cause. So how dare we here who are still living and breathing do anything short of being devoted to the same cause that they gave the last full measure of devotion to. That we here highly resolve these dead shall not have died in vain. That the nation shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And one of the things that I want to point out here is that in Lincoln's speech here, he uses the word nation, and never once does he use the word states. Now, at the beginning of Lincoln's presidency and the beginning of the war, he refers to the country the way everybody does, as it's a union of states. That concept of states' rights and the power of the states, the government of the states. You watch the movie Gettysburg, and you see how everybody from Virginia, our home is Virginia. They really do see the country at that time as a collection, a union of states. So it's always, you always hear Lincoln referring to it as the Union, the Union, the Union. We need to preserve the Union. We're fighting to preserve the Union. But tied up in with the Emancipation Proclamation, Executive Order, January 1st, 1863, is this also a matching concept that this idea is bigger than just these individual states, that the idea that all men are created equal, this idea that is being fought for, that this is an idea that should unite us all into a nation, that this is one idea, one nation. And so you'll notice that in the speech he uses the word nation, and pretty much from this point on, 1863 on, you'll always hear Lincoln referring to as the nation. And it's hand in hand with that change of were fighting to preserve the Union to that